something extraordinary is unfolding today, and if you have been dismissing it as just another ordinary lunar movement, you may be overlooking one of the most meaningful energetic turning points of this entire cycle. There are moments in astrology that quietly pass through the calendar, and then there are moments that arrive carrying the weight of years, even decades. Today belongs to the second kind. On July 16th, the moon moves into Virgo, and at first glance that might not seem remarkable because the moon changes signs every few days. It is easy to assume this is simply another routine transition, another brief emotional shift that will come and go before anyone notices. But this passage is carrying a significance that reaches far beyond the moon itself. What makes this day so powerful is not merely that the moon is traveling through Virgo. It is that this is the final time the moon will cross the south node, while the south node remains in Virgo before this opportunity disappears for another 18 years. Pause for a moment and truly absorb that length of time. 18 years represents an entire chapter of human experience, enough time for identities to transform, relationships to evolve, dreams to rise and disappear, and lives to be rewritten. That is why today deserves your attention. The South Node has always symbolized release. It marks the place where accumulated weight finally begins to fall away. It reflects outdated habits, unresolved karmic patterns, familiar emotional reactions, and invisible cycles that continue operating beneath your awareness long after they have stopped serving your growth. Imagine carrying an old program inside your mind that has been running quietly for years, consuming energy without you even realizing it. You stopped needing it a long time ago, yet it never truly shut down. The South Node represents that hidden operating system, and today the moon makes one final contact with it before this chapter closes for nearly 2 decades. I believe this encounter activates an enormous clearing process, not only across the collective consciousness, but with exceptional intensity for 3 particular zodiac signs. If you have recently felt strangely drained, if your body has seemed unusually heavy, if sleep no longer restores you the way it once did, or if you have struggled to explain why your energy keeps disappearing despite doing everything you normally would to recover, do not dismiss those sensations. There is a deeper astrological reason connected to this experience, and later we will uncover exactly why your physical state may be reflecting something much larger than simple exhaustion. Before we can reach that explanation, however, it is essential to understand the wider story, because nothing happening today exists by itself. This moment is not an isolated event floating independently through the calendar. Instead, it serves as the final activation point within a much larger sequence that has been unfolding throughout the entire month. Once you recognize how every planetary movement has been building toward this single moment, many of the emotions, uncertainties, realizations, and internal shifts you have been carrying will begin to organize themselves into a picture that finally makes sense. July of 2026 is not an ordinary month from an astrological perspective. In fact, it stands among the most concentrated periods of planetary activity we have witnessed in quite some time. That is not dramatic language. It is simply an honest reflection of how many major celestial events are overlapping within a remarkably short period. At the very beginning of the month, Jupiter formed a square with Chiron, exposing the uncomfortable tension between the desire to expand into something greater and the pain of old emotional wounds that still demanded attention. Many people felt themselves standing between hope and vulnerability, wanting to move forward while simultaneously confronting parts of themselves they believed had already healed. Soon afterward, on July 4th, Mars joined Uranus in Gemini, producing an atmosphere filled with unpredictability, sudden developments, sharp awakenings, and disruptive momentum. For countless individuals, that alignment felt impossible to ignore because its energy arrived suddenly, creating shifts that were both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. Then came July 7th, when Neptune stationed retrograde, turning awareness inward and encouraging people to question illusions they had unconsciously accepted. Just 2 days later, on July 9th, Venus entered Virgo, quietly preparing the emotional and practical landscape for what is now reaching its climax. Following that, the new moon in Cancer arrived on July 14th, inviting the planting of entirely new emotional foundations, encouraging people to rebuild their inner world from a place of greater authenticity and security. Now, only 2 days after that new moon, the moon itself steps into Virgo today, linking every one of those earlier events together. Yet the significance does not stop there, because the timing reaches even further ahead. Only 2 days from now, on July 18th, Uranus in Gemini forms an exact trine with Pluto in Aquarius. This is an exceptionally rare and historically meaningful aspect that reflects harmonious transformation across the deepest structures of civilization, including systems of power, technological evolution, collective organization, and the broader architecture of society itself. Understanding that larger context changes everything about today's Virgo moon. Rather than viewing it as an ordinary lunar transit, it becomes clear that this movement functions as the grounding force for the enormous wave of outer planetary energy now flowing through the collective. It is as though the universe has spent the entire month building tremendous electrical potential layer after layer, alignment after alignment, until finally the Virgo moon provides the pathway through which all of that accumulated energy can move into tangible reality. Suddenly, what existed only as invisible pressure begins expressing itself through the body, through everyday decisions, through physical awareness, and through practical action that can reshape daily life. That is precisely why this transit feels dramatically different from the moon, simply changing signs as it normally does. There is another reason this day carries such emotional weight. It represents the closing ceremony of a cycle that has been unfolding since January of 2025. Throughout that entire period, the lunar nodes have occupied the Pisces and Virgo axis. During these 18 months, the North Node in Pisces has continually encouraged humanity to surrender more deeply to intuition, spiritual trust, compassion, and the willingness to release the illusion that every outcome must be controlled. At the same time, the South Node in Virgo has steadily dismantled our dependence on perfectionism, relentless self-criticism, endless analysis, and the exhausting belief that every challenge could be solved simply by working harder or controlling every possible detail. Whether people realized it consciously or not, these themes have quietly shaped countless decisions, emotional lessons, and personal awakenings over the past year and a half. Now that chapter is reaching its conclusion. On July 26th, only 10 days from today, the lunar nodes leave the Pisces and Virgo axis completely and begin an entirely new evolutionary cycle as they move into Leo and Aquarius. That shift opens the door to a profoundly different stage of collective and personal development. And understanding why that transition matters will become the foundation for everything we explore next. If you've been wondering why today feels heavier than its place on the calendar suggests, this is the reason. The moon entering Virgo on July 16th is far more than another routine movement across the zodiac. It represents the final conjunction between the moon and the South Node, while the South Node remains on the Virgo and Pisces axis before that cycle comes to an end for the next 18 years. Think of this moment as the final act of a long ceremony rather than the beginning of a new story. It is the last pass, the final clearing, the moment when the universe gathers everything that has remained unfinished and asks whether you are finally willing to release it. Imagine a room that has been cleaned over and over again, yet tiny traces of dust continue hiding in places your eyes rarely notice. That is what this transit resembles. It is the final sweep through the hidden corners of your inner world, collecting lingering karmic residue, outdated emotional attachments, familiar behavioral patterns, and old survival strategies that quietly continued existing long after their purpose had ended. This is why so many people have been sensing that something feels unusual throughout this week, even if they cannot explain it with words. Your conscious mind may still be trying to understand what is changing, but another part of you recognized this transition long before your thoughts caught up. Your nervous system sensed it. Your emotions sensed it. Even your body began preparing for it before you consciously realized anything was different. Habits that once helped you survive now feel strangely uncomfortable. Emotional reactions that once seemed automatic no longer fit the person you are becoming. Coping mechanisms that protected you during earlier chapters of your life suddenly feel too small, too heavy, or simply ineffective. None of this is happening by accident. Everything that still belongs to an older version of yourself is gradually being brought into the light, because this conjunction offers one final opportunity to let it leave. Naturally, that process can feel unsettling. Releasing something familiar almost always creates temporary discomfort because the human mind instinctively clings to what it recognizes, even when it no longer supports growth. Yet it is essential to understand the true nature of what is occurring. This is not a story about losing yourself. It is a story about revealing the version of yourself that has been waiting beneath everything you no longer need. There is an enormous difference between destruction and purification, and confusing the two often creates unnecessary fear. Destruction removes value. Purification removes what has been covering it. What is unfolding today belongs to the second category. It is not taking away your future. It is making room for it. Earlier, I mentioned that many people have been experiencing unusual physical exhaustion, and now the deeper reason begins to emerge. The moon has always been connected with the physical body, influencing emotional rhythms, instinctive reactions, sleep cycles, and the delicate balance of the nervous system. Virgo, meanwhile, governs the digestive system, the enteric nervous system, and the remarkable biological intelligence responsible for deciding what should be absorbed and what should be eliminated. In other words, Virgo oversees one of the body's most fundamental tasks, determining what deserves to remain and what must be released. When that symbolism merges with the South Node, whose entire purpose revolves around letting go, the result becomes deeply physical rather than merely psychological. This is not simply an emotional experience happening inside your thoughts. Your body itself may be participating in the process, attempting to release burdens it has quietly carried for far too long. Suddenly, seemingly unrelated physical sensations begin fitting together into a much larger picture. Throughout this entire month, enormous outer planetary alignments involving Uranus, Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn have been creating a powerful energetic atmosphere operating beneath everyday awareness. Whether consciously recognized or not, that constant background intensity has encouraged many nervous systems to remain in a prolonged state of heightened alertness, almost as though the body has been waiting for something significant to happen without fully understanding what it was preparing for. The conjunction between the Moon and the South Node in Virgo now arrives as the point where that prolonged vigilance finally begins to soften. It is almost as if your entire system receives permission to stop bracing for impact. That is why the exhaustion may feel so overwhelming. This is different from ordinary burnout. It reaches beyond workplace pressure or relationship difficulties. I believe what many people are experiencing resembles a profound recalibration within the autonomic nervous system itself, and the period surrounding July 16th represents the strongest expression of that adjustment. You may notice yourself sleeping far longer than usual while still waking without the sense of restoration you expected. Your digestive system may begin responding differently, not simply through temporary discomfort, but by revealing what your body no longer wishes to tolerate. Sometimes that message appears through food. Sometimes it appears through certain environments. Sometimes it becomes obvious that particular situations, relationships, or daily routines have quietly consumed your energy for far longer than you admitted. Your body begins communicating what your conscious mind postponed, acknowledging. This should not automatically be interpreted as anxiety, nor should it convince you that something inside you is breaking. I believe this is a process of recalibration, one that becomes more difficult whenever we refuse to cooperate with it. The harder we insist on forcing ourselves forward, while every signal points toward rest, the louder the body must speak before we finally listen. That is why honoring your need for recovery during this period becomes incredibly important. There are moments when determination creates progress, and there are moments when surrender creates healing. This transit belongs firmly in the second category. There is another piece of today's astrological picture that many people overlook, yet it adds extraordinary depth to everything already taking place. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and at this moment Mercury is retrograde in Cancer. Within astrological mechanics, when the moon enters Virgo, it naturally expresses itself through Mercury, because Mercury serves as Virgo's ruling planet. The condition of that ruler influences the entire experience of the transit. Since Mercury is moving retrograde through Cancer, the precise, organized, analytical qualities normally associated with Virgo are no longer directed primarily towards solving external problems. Instead, they are guided inward, encouraging reflection upon emotional foundations, family experiences, childhood conditioning, and the earliest patterns that shaped your understanding of safety, belonging, and identity before you even possessed the vocabulary to describe those experiences. Rather than asking how to repair the outside world, this transit quietly asks what within you first learned to believe that constant fixing was necessary. That subtle shift transforms today's energy into something remarkably profound. Even more meaningful is what happens later this evening. After entering Virgo, the moon forms a supportive sextile with Mercury retrograde in Cancer. In that moment, the emotional wisdom of the heart and the analytical intelligence of the mind begin working together instead of pulling in opposite directions. Virgo contributes clarity, discernment, and careful observation. Cancer contributes emotional memory, compassion, and the courage to revisit experiences that once felt too vulnerable to examine. Together, they create an unusually supportive window for gently unraveling emotional patterns that may have seemed impossible to understand before, and recognizing why that opportunity matters becomes the perfect foundation for what comes next. The transformation taking place now reaches much deeper than rearranging your surroundings or becoming more organized in your daily routine. Those external actions may naturally arise, but they are only reflections of a much more profound process unfolding beneath the surface. I believe this transit is inviting you to return to emotional places you may have avoided for years, especially those connected to family experiences and the earliest chapters of your life, not to relive the pain, but to finally understand it through a completely different lens. What is emerging now is not new material. Nothing appearing today was suddenly created by the universe. Instead, long-forgotten emotional memories, unconscious beliefs, and unresolved patterns that have remained hidden deep within your inner world are quietly rising into awareness. Some of these impressions have been resting in the background of your psyche for years, perhaps even decades, shaping your reactions without your conscious permission. At the very same time, the moon forms a harmonious trine with Chiron in Taurus, the wounded healer occupying the sign associated with self-worth and personal value. This creates an extraordinary emotional atmosphere because, as the South Node helps dissolve the exhausting belief that your worth must constantly be earned through perfection, relentless productivity, or endless self-improvement, something healthier naturally begins taking its place. Instead of measuring yourself against impossible standards, you begin recognizing a truth that may have felt inaccessible until now. Your value has never depended upon flawless performance. Peace does not require constant usefulness. love does not have to be purchased through sacrifice. Worthiness has never been a reward waiting at the end of endless achievement. For some people, simply allowing that realization to settle into the heart may become one of the most important internal shifts they have experienced in years. It has the potential to change not only how they see themselves today, but how they choose to live from this point forward. Among all the signs moving through this collective transition, however, there are three that I believe will experience these energies with exceptional intensity. And the first is Virgo. If your sun, moon, or ascendant is in Virgo, pay close attention because today's alignment reaches directly into the very center of your identity. The moon, entering your own sign while joining the south node, activates your first house, the part of the chart connected with your sense of self, your physical body, your personal identity, and the image you present to the world. For approximately 18 months, the South Node has been quietly dismantling one of your deepest survival strategies, the belief that maintaining control is the only way to remain safe. Whether you admitted it or not, you have likely felt this process unfolding. You may have noticed increasing exhaustion. You may have discovered that no matter how much effort you invested, no matter how carefully you organized every responsibility, no matter how perfectly you attempted to manage every detail, satisfaction always remained just beyond reach. It could have felt as though every achievement immediately created another expectation, leaving you trapped inside a cycle where enough never truly existed. It is important to understand that this was never evidence of personal failure. This has been the South Node faithfully carrying out its purpose by exposing a pattern that could no longer continue if genuine growth was going to occur. As the moon reaches 0 degrees of Virgo today, I believe many Virgos arrive at a decisive internal turning point regarding perfectionism itself. This should not be interpreted as something frightening. It is far closer to freedom than collapse. The constant inner commentator, the voice that automatically notices every imperfection, every missed opportunity, every reason something could have been done better, finally begins losing its authority. For perhaps the first time in a very long while, that relentless inner pressure is invited to become quiet. Simultaneously, because of the supportive trine to Chiron in your ninth house, this emotional release extends beyond your habits into your entire philosophy of life. The beliefs you have carried about achievement, value, success, and personal identity begin transforming from the inside outward. Instead of defining yourself exclusively through what you accomplish, a new understanding gradually takes root. You begin moving away from believing that your existence must constantly be justified through productivity, toward recognizing that your worth exists independently of your performance. That shift may appear simple when described in words, yet for a Virgo whose identity has often been intertwined with responsibility, usefulness, and excellence, it represents nothing less than a profound inner revolution. On a practical level, you may suddenly feel compelled to simplify your life in tangible ways, clearing unnecessary possessions, reducing obligations, releasing professional commitments that have quietly exploited your dedication, and establishing healthier boundaries around your time, your energy, and your physical well-being may no longer feel optional. Even more significant is that these choices are unlikely to carry the familiar burden of guilt. Instead of sacrificing yourself to meet everyone else's expectations, you begin recognizing that protecting your own well-being is not selfish. It is necessary. I believe that once you step across this threshold and experience the relief waiting on the other side, returning to the old version of yourself will no longer feel possible. Deep within, you have probably sensed this transition approaching for quite some time, and today's alignment simply gives visible form to what your soul has already been preparing to embrace. The second sign experiencing this powerful shift is Pisces. If your sun, moon, or ascendant falls in Pisces, today's transit activates your seventh house, the area governing partnerships, committed relationships, and every significant bond through which you encounter yourself reflected in another person. Because the North Node currently occupies Pisces, your overall life direction continues receiving strong evolutionary support from the universe. You are being encouraged toward greater spiritual alignment and toward the fullest expression of your authentic self. Yet while that forward movement unfolds, the South Node remains across the sky in Virgo, meaning much of your karmic release is taking place through the relationships you have chosen, maintained, or struggled to leave behind. If you pause and honestly examine your life, you probably already recognize which connections this message concerns. Over approximately the past 18 months, many Pisces individuals have found themselves repeating familiar relational patterns, whether within romantic partnerships, business collaborations, or deeply trusted friendships. Again and again, you may have become the one making adjustments, creating harmony, absorbing emotional turbulence, softening conflict, or carrying criticism that never truly belonged to you. Without fully noticing when it happened, accommodating other people's needs may have become so automatic that you gradually lost sight of where their emotional responsibilities ended and your own began. And recognizing that pattern becomes the essential doorway into everything this transit is preparing to reveal next. That pattern exists because Pisces naturally experiences life through connection. You instinctively absorb emotions, sense unspoken feelings, and often understand another person's inner world before they have even found the words to express it themselves. Compassion has always been one of your greatest gifts, yet throughout this entire South Node journey in Virgo, another truth has been quietly revealing itself. Compassion without healthy boundaries slowly transforms into self-abandonment. There is a profound difference between loving someone and disappearing inside their needs, and I believe this transit is determined to help you recognize that distinction with unmistakable clarity. As the moon joins the South Node in your 7th house today, an emotional threshold is reached. Rather than asking you to keep investing in possibilities that may never become reality, the universe invites you to see your relationships exactly as they exist in this present moment. Not through memories of how everything began, not through dreams of what could happen if another person finally changed, not through hope alone, simply through honest observation of what is true today. If a relationship consistently leaves you depleted instead of supported, smaller instead of stronger, or repeatedly asks you to sacrifice your own well-being in order to preserve it, then this alignment gently but firmly suggests that the emotional price has become greater than the relationship itself can justify. There is extraordinary support available as you face that realization. Neptune, your ruling planet, recently stationed retrograde in Aries, and is simultaneously forming supportive aspects with both Uranus and Pluto. That combination strengthens something many Pisces have struggled to access consistently: the spiritual courage to honor their own path, even when doing so disappoints someone else. It is the courage to choose inner truth over familiar comfort, to accept temporary solitude if necessary, and to remember that protecting your own energy is not an act of selfishness. This is not an invitation to become distant or emotionally closed. It is an invitation to reclaim the life force that has been quietly flowing into relationships that continually demanded more than they returned. As those energetic cords begin loosening, you may discover a version of yourself that feels lighter, clearer, and more authentic than anything you have experienced in quite some time. Long-standing patterns of unhealthy dependence are ready to dissolve. The only remaining question is whether you are willing to release them, as they are already preparing to release you. For Gemini, however, today's experience unfolds with an entirely different rhythm. If your sun, moon, or ascendant is in Gemini, this transit carries an intensity that feels far more immediate. Virgo is experiencing an internal transformation of identity. Pisces is encountering profound truth within relationships. Gemini stands at the center of something that resembles a sudden awakening, powerful enough to change the direction of an entire chapter of life. The reason becomes clear once we examine the chart. The Moon and South Node meet within your fourth house, the area governing home, family, ancestry, emotional roots, and the deepest foundations upon which your life has been built. At the same time, Uranus continues traveling through your first house in Gemini itself, still carrying the powerful momentum created by its conjunction with Mars on July 4th. That explosive alignment has not disappeared. Its influence continues moving through your system, encouraging dramatic personal evolution. Together, these placements create an intense T-square dynamic. One force reaches downward into your foundations, pulling unresolved ancestral material toward the surface through the South Node. Another force pushes powerfully from your own identity through Uranus, insisting that profound personal change can no longer be postponed. Standing between those opposing currents, you may feel pressure building from every direction simultaneously. For you, this karmic clearing rarely arrives as a quiet emotional release. Instead, it often appears through decisive breakthroughs that permanently alter the landscape beneath your feet. The South Node in the fourth house suggests that inherited family narratives, generational fears, unconscious beliefs, and emotional patterns passed from one generation to the next have quietly shaped your life without your full awareness. Perhaps you inherited ideas about conflict, success, security, money, or what you were expected to become. Perhaps you accepted limitations that were never truly yours to carry. Whatever those inherited stories may be, they have remained embedded within your foundation, influencing countless choices while silently restricting future growth. Another important layer strengthens this message. Mercury, your ruling planet, is currently retrograde in Cancer, occupying your second house of resources and self-worth. Even the ruler of your chart is encouraging you to reconsider what genuine security actually means. Are you protecting something that truly supports your life, or simply holding tightly to familiar circumstances because habit feels safer than change? As the Moon passes across the South Node in your fourth house today, I believe many Geminis experience a realization that arrives with remarkable force. Whether it emerges suddenly or develops after months of quiet inner pressure, the message becomes impossible to ignore. Continuing to suppress your authentic identity, simply to preserve a family dynamic, or maintain a living arrangement that no longer reflects who you are, is no longer sustainable. Continuing to organize your life around expectations that originated from someone else's vision instead of your own gradually becomes impossible. This is not about assigning blame to those who came before you, nor is it about creating unnecessary separation. Instead, it is about recognizing that some foundations were never built upon genuine stability. They survived through obligation, guilt, and fear of what might happen if you finally stepped into your own authority. The lingering Mars and Uranus energy moving through your sign now supplies the courage required to make that long-delayed transition. Beyond this release, another opportunity is already taking shape: the Uranus trine. Pluto aspect on July 18th begins restructuring your 10th house of career and public purpose. The emotional weight you release from your foundation does far more than create inner healing. It opens space for an entirely new professional direction to emerge. The future has already begun calling your name, yet answering that call becomes difficult, while old family narratives continue holding you in place. If you have sensed for some time that your current life can no longer contain the person you are becoming, today's alignment may simply confirm what your heart has understood for months. Even if the experience feels uncertain or temporarily unsettling, I believe it represents one of the most liberating turning points available to you now. Before we finish, there is one final message that may be even more valuable than understanding every planetary detail. Astrology offers awareness, but how you cooperate with the energy determines what unfolds next. This transit carries significant emotional weight, And the natural response when everything feels overwhelming is often to retreat into analysis, searching for explanations, trying to mentally solve every feeling before allowing yourself to experience it. Yet the symbolism of a Virgo South node teaches something entirely different. Instead of attempting to control the process intellectually, allow your body to become your guide. If overwhelming fatigue arrives, honor your need for sleep. If your digestion changes, pay close attention to what your body no longer wishes to absorb, and recognize that this message may apply not only to food, but also to environments, relationships, responsibilities, and emotional dynamics. If you suddenly feel inspired to organize your surroundings, release unnecessary possessions, clean forgotten spaces, or remove objects that no longer carry meaning, trust those impulses. They may represent your nervous system expressing release through physical action. Reconnect with the earth element whenever possible. Spend time outdoors. Stand barefoot on the ground. Allow water to calm your system through a shower or bath. Move your body gently. Slow your breathing with intention. These are not merely general wellness suggestions. I believe they reflect exactly how this transit invites your body to participate in the larger process already unfolding. Above all else, offer yourself kindness. The South Node does not arrive to punish you. It reveals where attachment has become excessive, where perfectionism, relentless control, and the pressure to have every answer have quietly replaced peace. Nothing requires complete resolution before tonight. This release does not depend upon flawless execution. It unfolds naturally, whether or not you manage every detail perfectly. In many ways, surrendering the need to manage it perfectly may be the deepest lesson hidden within today's alignment. The karmic cycle that began in January of 2025 is now reaching its completion. The vessel is gradually being emptied so that something entirely different can eventually fill it. Once the lunar nodes shift into Leo and Aquarius on July the 26th, a new evolutionary chapter begins bringing fresh creative expression, new collective themes, and opportunities that simply could not fully arrive while older patterns continued occupying your inner landscape. Space must exist before something new can enter, and that is precisely the purpose of today. If you have stayed with this message until the very end, perhaps some part of you recognized that truth long before hearing it spoken. Thank you for sharing this time with me and allowing me to walk through this extraordinary moment alongside you. If this message resonated and you would like to continue exploring these astrological journeys together, I would be deeply grateful if you chose to subscribe. Your support truly makes these conversations possible. I also invite you to share your experience in the comments. Tell me whether you are Virgo, Pisces, or Gemini. Tell me what this week has been revealing inside your own life. Tell me what you feel prepared to release as this cycle comes to an end. I read every comment because there is something genuinely meaningful about witnessing these transformations together as a community. Be especially gentle with yourself today, because today carries unusual significance, and I look forward to meeting you again in the next video.